The mornings in Ashwood always held a kind of quiet I'd come to cherish in my retirement. The air turned crisp in late September, and the maples along my back fence flared with orange and rust like a final burst of joy before winter. I had lived in this house for over 30 years, most of it shared with my late husband, Paul. But the solitude never settled heavy on me, at least not since Caleb came along. My grandson was the kind of child who saw stories in shadows and constellations in sidewalk chalk. He was 8 years old and already knew how to use a library catalog better than most adults. On the weekends, he'd come over with his backpack stuffed full of books I'd borrowed for him and snacks I wasn't supposed to give him. He called me Nana Mim, a nickname born of toddler talk that stuck, and I loved the way it sounded, bright, personal, like a secret between us. We had a rhythm, Caleb and I. Pancakes on Saturday mornings, walks through the orchard trail just behind the neighborhood, and afternoon crafts at the kitchen table. Last weekend, we pressed autumn leaves between wax paper and pages of an old dictionary. Caleb had picked each one like it was a treasure-deep burgundy fire orange golden with freckled edges. He labeled them in neat little block letters and said we should turn them into postcards. One day, when we travel the world together, he said, his hands busy arranging the leaves, "We can send these to all the places we've been." I laughed and told him he'd better save up. He looked at me serious in that way only children can be. "I will, and you're coming with me." Adrian and Tessa came by that evening to pick him up. Adrian kissed my cheek, distracted as usual, already glancing at his phone. Tessa looked tired, but smiled politely. I offered them leftovers. They declined. We stood in the doorway exchanging pleasantries, like always. Nothing felt strange, and yet lately there had been a kind of softness around them that seemed forced. A slight detachment, like we were all playing parts in a family we hadn't quite figured out how to hold together. When they drove off, Caleb waved from the back seat until they rounded the corner. I watched until the taillights disappeared, then went back inside and folded the leaf cards into a box I kept for someday things. It was the next morning, just after 5:30, when the phone rang. The ringing jolted me out of sleep like a sudden drop. At first, I thought it was the clock radio misfiring, but when I blinked at the numbers glowing red in the dark, 5:31 a.m., I knew. Calls at that hour are never good news. My heart was already racing as I reached for the phone on the nightstand. "Hello, Mom?" Adrian's voice, but wrong. Strained, thin trembling, like he was holding something together with brittle tape. "Adrian, what is it? What's happened?" He didn't answer right away. I sat up in bed, already reaching for the lamp but knocking it slightly askew in the process. The bulb buzzed to life, casting everything in a dim, warped glow. "It's Caleb." His voice cracked on the name. There was an accident. My throat closed. Where is he? What happened? Adrian made a choked sound. I could hear someone crying in the background, deep, raw sobs. Tessa. I knew that sound. It was the kind of grief that couldn't be shaped into words. He was crossing Fairmont Avenue, leaving Jacob's house. A car didn't see him. Adrian's voice was dissolving. They say it was instant. He didn't make it to the hospital. I couldn't speak. My hands went cold. My mouth opened, but nothing came. They tried Mom. They tried everything. But it was too late. I remember sliding down the side of the bed, my legs no longer under me. I sat on the floor, the receiver pressed to my ear, hearing words I couldn't accept. My boy, my sweet Caleb. Just yesterday, he was picking out leaves and planning our imaginary travels. Just yesterday, he had peanut butter on his chin and told me I made the best pancakes in the world. "No," I whispered. "That can't be right. There must be a mistake. He's only 8. I'm so sorry, Adrian said, and then the line filled with his sobbing. Loud, uncontrolled. I couldn't tell where his grief ended and mine began. I don't remember much after that. I think I said I'd come. I think I hung up the phone. But mostly, I remember the quiet that followed. A kind of stillness that wasn't peace, but absence. The walls around me blurred. The house didn't feel like mine. It didn't feel like anything. At some point, I found myself at the kitchen window, staring out at the garden Caleb had helped me plant. The tomato vines still clung to their stakes. The leaves were gold and red and beautiful and meaningless. The funeral was set for Friday. The church smelled of damp wool and lilies, the kind of scent that clings to morning. Rain tapped steadily on the windows, a soft percussion that never let up. Outside umbrellas bloomed like slow-moving flowers as people filtered in neighbors. Teachers, a few parents from school. Caleb's class had made cards with scribbled hearts and rainbows taped in clumsy rows along the foyer wall. I stood by the entryway shaking hands I didn't recognize, hearing voices speak his name in low, reverent tones. I nodded, thanked them, and kept looking past them toward the hallway, waiting for something, though I couldn't have said what. Adrian and Tessa arrived just before the service, both pale and hollowed out. Adrian's suit was wrinkled. Tessa clutched a tissue so tightly her knuckles were white. They said little to anyone. When the pastor greeted them, Adrian just nodded. Tessa didn't seem to hear. Most of the planning had fallen to me. They weren't in a state to make decisions, and someone had to. Mr. Holloway, the funeral director, was kind but stiff. He wore a dark gray suit and spoke in practiced, gentle tones. You did well picking the music, he told me. Simple. Honest. That's good for a child. He asked once quietly if I wanted to view the body. I hesitated, my hand already halfway to my chest. It's just the injuries, he added carefully. It may not be how you want to remember him. I shook my head. No. I'd remember him with jam on his face, not like that. The casket was so small. Too small. White polished with a silver cross etched into the top. It looked more like a box for keepsakes than for a life. At the end of the service, one by one, people approached to lay flowers atop it. Some children cried. Others stood confused, wide-eyed, their parents whispering in their ears. When it was my turn, I stepped forward with the white rose I'd pulled from my garden that morning. It was Caleb's favorite. I bent down and touched the edge of the casket, trying to feel him through the wood, through the cold. I'll love you forever, I whispered. The rose slid from my fingers and landed gently on the lid. The cemetery was waiting. The rain hadn't let up all day. By the time I returned home from the cemetery, my coat was soaked through and my shoes squelched as I stepped into the house. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness suited me. I dropped my purse by the door, peeled off the wet coat, and sank into the sofa without even removing my shoes. It was over. He was gone. The flowers were buried with him. The cards from his classmates tucked beneath the lid of a box I couldn't bring myself to open. Everything else, the sympathy, the prayers the casseroles left at the door, felt weightless, like they belonged to someone else's tragedy. I must have sat there for hours. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the kitchen clock each second, pulling me farther from the boy I'd known. By the time I stirred, it was past 6. The house had gone completely dark, except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside. I stood more from habit than purpose and walked toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it. A soft sound like a foot dragging over gravel. Then another. Not the wind. Not an animal. Something deliberate. I froze. It came again closer this time. I crossed to the door and pressed my eye to the peephole, already scolding myself for being paranoid. And then I saw him. A small figure stood beneath the porch light, clothes torn, soaked, clinging to a thin frame, one shoe missing. His face was smeared with dirt, hair matted, lips trembling. I couldn't breathe. My hand moved on its own, unfastening the chain and pulling open the door. Caleb. He looked up at me with eyes too wide for his small face, bloodshot and ringed with grime. Nana Mim, he rasped. Help me. I dropped to my knees. My fingers reached for his cheek. He flinched at first but didn't pull away. His skin was cold, damp, but warm enough to know he was alive. My chest collapsed with a sound I didn't recognize, a sob or a prayer or both. I wrapped my arms around him. He was trembling so hard it felt like the shakes were inside me too. His breath came in ragged bursts. They tried to kill me, he whispered, his mouth against my shoulder. They put me in a box and buried me. I woke up in the dirt. I held him tighter, afraid to let go, afraid he might vanish. Inside, I was already trying to push the impossible words into some kind of shape I could hold. But there was no shape for this, only the solid, shaking weight of him in my arms. I brought him inside. I stripped the wet clothes from his body with trembling hands, careful not to press too hard against his skin. He winced when I pulled the shirt over his head, and I murmured apologies as though that could undo any of it. His ribs were smudged with dirt, scraped in places, but nothing looked broken. No bruises I could see, no head wound, no sign of the injuries they'd claimed. The bathwater turned brown almost instantly. Caleb sat in the tub without a word, knees hugged to his chest, eyes staring ahead. I washed him gently, using the same sponge he'd used the last time he stayed the night, the one with the little duck embroidered on the edge. It hadn't even dried completely since I last cleaned it. He didn't speak until I wrapped him in a towel and carried him into the living room. They said it was special medicine, he whispered, his voice barely a thread. Mom said it would help me sleep, but it burned my throat. I felt my whole body lock, like something inside me snapped inward. What kind of medicine, I don't know. It was in a blue bottle. They made me drink it in the kitchen. Daddy said not to cry. He told me I'd wake up in heaven and wouldn't feel anything. My knees gave out, and I lowered us both onto the couch. I couldn't find words. All I could do was pull him closer, as if I could protect him now in a way I hadn't before. I woke up in the box, he said. It was really dark. I couldn't move at first. I think I screamed, but no one could hear me. There was a crack in the lid, like it wasn't closed all the way, and the dirt was soft. I just kept digging. I didn't know where I was. I just wanted to find you. I wiped the corner of his mouth, though nothing was there. I needed my hands to do something. I needed the earth to stop spinning. After I dressed him in fresh pajamas and covered him with 2 blankets, I made him a bowl of soup. He ate with slow, mechanical movements, like his body still didn't trust the food. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "Please don't let them take me back. You're safe," I told him. "You're not going anywhere." But even as I said the words, 1,000 questions spun in my mind. I'd buried that boy 3 days ago, and now he was here, warm and alive, and telling me a story I couldn't begin to understand. I stayed by his side the whole night, listening to his breathing, waiting for the next thing I had to do. And by morning, I knew where we had to go. We arrived at the Ashwood police station just after 8. I had wrapped Caleb in his warmest coat and held his hand so tightly he didn't once try to let go. The morning was cold, but I barely noticed. All I could feel was the pulse in my throat hammering faster with every step. Inside the station was quiet. A young officer at the front desk looked up from a clipboard and gave us a distracted nod. "I need to speak with Chief Marsh," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm building in my chest. "This is urgent." He gave us a longer look, eyes flicking down to Caleb, then back at me. "Chief's busy this morning." "What's the matter?" "My grandson was buried 3 days ago," I said, "and now he's standing right here." That got his attention. His eyebrows lifted. "Ma'am, are you saying I'm saying there's been a crime? A serious one. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, and cover-up." He made a slow movement toward the phone on his desk. "Just a moment." We waited 5 more minutes before Chief Marsh emerged from the back hallway. His presence always carried a kind of forced calm, as if he expected everyone to match his tempo. When he saw me, something in his face tightened. "Mrs. LeClaire, I'm sorry again for your loss." His voice was smooth like worn leather. "But if you're here to talk about the funeral, this is Caleb." I stepped aside. Caleb looked up, his face pale but composed. Marsh didn't blink. "Ma'am, I'm not delusional. He's real. He was buried alive and he escaped." Marsh gave Caleb a cursory glance. "That child resembles your grandson, sure, but I attended that service myself." Caleb stepped forward. "My name is Caleb Julian LeClaire. My birthday is April 15th. My favorite pie is Nana Mim's apple crumble. I hate green beans, and I have a scar on my left ankle from falling off my bike when I was 6. Marsh stared unmoved. "Grief does strange things, Miriam. I think you need rest. Maybe professional help. If you continue parading someone else's child around town, we may have to consider child endangerment charges." I felt the floor drop beneath me. I gathered Caleb close and turned away before I said something that might cost us more than dignity. We walked out in silence, the weight of disbelief pressing down with every step. But disbelief wouldn't stop me. It never had. I knew someone who might still listen. I drove straight to Ashwood General, barely remembering the turns. Caleb sat beside me, quiet eyes fixed on the road ahead. I called ahead and asked for Dr. Simone Reyes, the coroner, who'd signed Caleb's death certificate. She had handled Paul's records after his heart attack 3 years ago. I remembered her as sharp and kind. I prayed she still was. When she met us in her office, her expression shifted the moment she saw Caleb. Not confusion, recognition. "This is him," I said. "They buried him, alive." Dr. Reyes slowly shut the door and lowered the blinds. "Come sit." She listened as I explained everything, what Caleb remembered, what I saw. She nodded slowly, then admitted she'd had doubts of her own. The physician listed on the certificate didn't exist. The paperwork had come with quiet pressure from someone above her pay grade. She'd been told not to ask questions. "I didn't have access to the body," she said. "They said the family refused an autopsy, but something didn't feel right." She examined Caleb carefully, hands gentle and deliberate. There was dirt beneath his fingernails, traces along his hairline scrapes, along his arms and legs. No bruises, no signs of impact trauma. Whatever they claimed happened. "This boy wasn't hit by a car," she murmured. "He was buried. And he got out." She reached for the phone. "You're not crazy, Miriam, and you're not alone. I'm going to help." I exhaled for the first time in days. And as I watched her dial, I realized we had just opened a door that could no longer be closed. Dr. Reyes moved quickly. Within hours, she had contacted State Investigator Lucian Rowe, and by the next morning, we sat in a small room with him and an FBI agent named Carmen Doyle. Neither of them flinched when we told them what had happened. They didn't look at Caleb like a ghost. They looked at him like a witness. By noon, a court order had been signed. The grave was dug up just after sunset, under portable lights and quiet murmurs. I stood beside Simone, holding Caleb's hand. When the casket finally emerged, its lid was splintered, cracked inward, and smeared with mud. They opened it slowly. It was empty. Lucian crouched beside it, running his gloved fingers along the broken edges. "This wasn't mechanical failure," he said. "This broke from the inside." They found small handprints embedded in the surrounding soil. The next morning, they brought in Mr. Holloway. He cracked almost immediately. He'd been paid $50,000 cash, no records, to handle a private arrangement, a substitute weight inside the casket. No embalming, no viewing, and no questions. "I thought it was just insurance fraud," he said, shaking. "They said the kid was gone already. I didn't know he was alive." Carmen didn't blink. "You didn't want to know." She turned to me then. "We'll need Caleb's full statement. And yours." I nodded. I had never in my life imagined sitting across from the FBI, holding my grandson's hand, ready to tell the world how he'd been buried alive and clawed his way free. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Not when the truth had finally begun to breathe again. The courtroom was cold even in spring. Caleb sat beside me at the witness table, his small hand tucked tightly in mine. He wore the same navy sweater I'd bought him last Christmas. It still hung a little loose on his frame, but he insisted on wearing it, said it made him feel brave. When they called his name, he stood. I started to rise with him, but he gave my hand one last squeeze and whispered, "I got it." His voice was steady as he answered the prosecutor's questions. He told them about the special medicine, about waking up in the dark, about clawing through soil, because all he could think about was getting to me. His eyes didn't waver, not even when they showed him pictures of the broken casket. The courtroom was silent when he finished. No cross-examination. No one dared. Later, the financial evidence came in Adrian's gambling history, the maxed-out credit cards, the sudden $4.5 million life insurance policy taken out 6 months before Caleb's supposed death. Tessa's emails showed she'd known everything. The plan had been meticulous and monstrous. Then came the arrest of Chief Marsh. He'd received $75,000 to look the other way. The forged death certificate, the refusal to investigate, none of it was a mistake. When the verdicts came down, I held Caleb as tightly as I had. That first night, he returned to me. Adrian and Tessa were sentenced to decades. Marsh, too. Holloway would serve time as well. The judge praised Caleb's courage, called him a survivor in every sense. We walked out of that courthouse into the daylight, the news cameras clicking behind us. I didn't speak until we were safely in the car. "You were incredible," I said. "So brave." He looked out the window, quiet for a moment. "I just wanted to be safe again." And that's when I knew it was time to build something new. The court made it official in early June. I was no longer just Nana Mim. I was Caleb's legal guardian, his safe place, his home. We left Ashwood behind and moved north to a quiet lakeside town called Belmere. Our cottage was small but warm, and the silence here was different, gentler, less haunted. Caleb started school again that fall. He made friends, joined the library club, and began sleeping through the night. The nightmares came less often. His smile returned little by little, like something remembering how to grow. One evening, we walked along the water's edge, the sun dipping behind the trees. Caleb looked up at me and asked, "We're a real family now, right?" I squeezed his hand. "The truest kind," I said. "Built on love, not DNA." He nodded, once content. That night, as he fell asleep beside the sound of the lake, I knew we were finally home.